Awesome, thank you. Everybody's had a very nutritious breakfast this morning out there. Some coffee, maybe. All right, so I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and maybe say a little bit about how they fit into this whole panel discussion. So first of all, I'm Patty Titus. I am the CISO at Booking Holdings, and I fortunately have never been involved in a data breach. However, I probably should not have said that out loud. I have come in post-breach into several companies that had issues, we'll just leave it at that, and had to do some cleanup activities. So I do know that some people are suspect of a CISO who's never been through a breach, but there are a few of us, and we're happy to say that we are hopefully a growing number. So I'm going to pass it to Russ.
Hi there, Russ Ayers. I'm the Deputy CISO at Equifax at the moment. In the past, I was the interim CISO during the Equifax breach of 2017. Please don't say that CVE number out loud. I'll probably get into convulsions, pass out on the floor. So we went through a pretty significant transformation during that period of time, and I've been there from the beginning until now.
I'm John Carlin. I currently chair the cybersecurity practice for Paul Weiss, which is a law firm. And prior to that, I served in government as the chief of staff at the FBI. Also oversaw national security for the Justice Department. And then most recently was brought back in to oversee the Justice Department, but while there, started off with SolarWinds and Colonial Pipeline. I've served as outside breach counsel in many of the largest breaches, including working with our next speaker. And while I won't promise this is the solution for all of you today, I will say the SolarWinds incident where they breached Mandiant, which is not normally a good news day for a cybersecurity company, is an instance where, because of the way they handled it, their share price went up dramatically. I will not, we cannot guarantee that will be the impact, but you can survive the breach, and hopefully today you will not think of lawyer and wince when it comes to responding to a breach, but we'll talk about ways to use that constructively.
Great. Thanks, John. I'm Tim Crothers. I'm Chief Information Security Officer for Mandiant, and been in the field just, this is year 40 in my career, so been around a little bit. Was at Target after their breach, spent several years there, came back to Mandiant actually after SolarWinds, and have lots of relevant stories from trench time. So.
Outstanding. So you have a panel of experts here who've been in the trenches. We're at the very end, we're going to give you some takeaways, and I think that's really important that when you come to a presentation like this, sure, we can tell you all about it, but it's what can you take back and apply, and how can you learn from the lessons that we've had to go through the School of Hard Knocks to hopefully make it a little bit easier for you. So first, I'm going to just start out with, as professionals who've recovered and supported real-life high-profile incidents, each of you can provide a few thoughts on preparing for and responding to a breach. This is an open-ended question, so I'd ask that you think about things that are key to the audience that they can take back to their own organizations, and we are going to start right to my right with Russ.
Great, thank you. A couple of things I would focus on from the very beginning. You're going to think that you're likely not going to get through this. The first thing to consider is you have friends in this group. This group, it's a very close-knit community. Reach out to your community. That's one of the first things that I would take away. As long as you're not going to try to sell me something, feel free to reach out to me. I'm glad to help. We've done that quite often because not only is it a small community, but you're also going to realize that very similar things are occurring over and over again. The same thing, obviously, we use Mandiant, the same thing that we talked about a minute ago. We were probably in the early stages more insular about our conversations because we were just trying to get our heads around it. The reality is, if you reach out and you talk to somebody that's been through it before, which we did a short period after, everybody is going to likely give you all the information you need and all the help you need. So that's one of the first things I would focus on. You have a large community, leverage it. The next thing I would focus on is get back to basics. You know, if you think of our breach, you're going to find situations where we had 3 scanners scanning trying to find struts, and those scanners missed detections. Doesn't mean that you couldn't have prevented it by patching. So if you get back to the basics, what you would have found is you're always going to get back to the root of some type of process, and then you got to think through, is that process going to reduce your risk? So in this case, do some versus challenges. If I had this but didn't have that, if I had very good patching but I didn't have very good scanning, would I be in a better state? And the reality is, yes, you would. If I didn't have very good scanning, you're going to find that you should probably build a compensating control around patching. And so if you look at the root of all of those, you're going to find good patching practice. Asset management was another key to us. You have to be able to identify wherever that asset is that's problematic and make sure you can get in touch with the person who owns it. That's basic asset management. It's not a very sexy thing to say you don't necessarily need the tool for that. That's right, you probably don't. You need good human factors to be able to determine how easy is it for people to do these things in your systems to make them more secure. A couple of other things that we noticed is that you have a ton of brand ambassadors inside your company. But it was one of the things that didn't occur to me right off the bat, because I was trying to get to customers and consumers. I wasn't thinking as much about the people that were in the organization. I kind of left them in the dark while I was informing everybody else. So the last thing I would point out is do the common denominators here. This is going to be fixed by people. It's done for people. It's going to be implemented through people. Common denominator is people. So think about those people that are your most important asset and keep them in the loop as much, at least, as you keep everybody else.
I want to amplify those remarks. And number one recommendation is prepare for a breach by imagining that the breach has occurred and then using that optic to work backwards. So here's what I mean by that. What I find often, the number one mistake that ends up with a CISO losing their job and having personal consequences is a failure to have communicated across the business and legal divide pre-incident to fully explain how the systems work and what the risks were. That is often motivated by the best of intent. You don't want to, you're trying not to cause issues on the business side of the house. They don't want to hear about friction, but they sure want to have heard about it post-incident, and what you'll find is they don't often understand what it is that you're saying, that it's the translation issue. So they didn't really understand the risk that they were accepting. And going back to basics, as the regulator, as the lawyer, as the person asking questions after the event who will look at the company, they tend to work the chain backwards. So first they'll say, what system was this? And who is in charge of having controls of the system? And so often, the major incidents I've responded to, it is something which was actually outside the province of the CISO. So for whatever reason, the business had an exception, or it was something that wasn't properly inventoried, and that's what gets hit. It's the surprise. Secondly, what was on it? And then there's always questions, and you may not own data governance, but you have the optic of security as to what the risk is when you have data on the system that you do not need to have. And so it'll be some legacy server with data that you didn't actually need to hold anymore in the company. There wasn't a good data governance program. Then going back, it'll be, it was single-factor authentication, but we have a multi-factor authentication policy. Yes, but this system had an exception, or we just acquired this system, or this was a system that a key executive really needed to use at the time, or we had tech debt. These are real issues, but the problem is that it wasn't memorialized in a way with a risk register, with a compensating control, where you can show that you had thought about that issue and it was a conscious choice at the time. Then working backwards, on the incident, okay, then they got into the system. How is it that they weren't detected? And that's what gets back to, it's not just the tool. So often you have the right tool, but it's not configured in a way that the SOC was able to read the output of the tool. Or because there's so much noise, you made conscious risk choices as to what would or wouldn't reach the SOC. So again, it's keeping track of here's the tweak that we made, and here were signals that we chose to ignore. Because on the cold record, as the regulator coming in after, it looks really bad that the system was capturing something that didn't make it to the SOC. How did they move laterally across the system? Why wasn't the data encrypted? How long did it take to respond? How had you planned for the business interruption and resilience, how long it would take to get back? That's another area where you don't really own that. You're there to, as the Chief Information Security Officer, spot and make real what it would look like if the worst happened, and don't tell them the worst won't happen, because my life has only been when it does. So make sure that you plan as if it is a catastrophe, and that it was something you couldn't see despite your best plans. How would they really get it back up and running? What's the investment? And as I turn it over, the number one best way to do it that I've done with all of these folks is to wargame it, is to tabletop it, and to use a scenario that starts small, and then builds into that full company catastrophe that really is not a security issue anymore, but is a business risk issue, and then do the tabletop with the CEO, the CFO, the general counsel, and make sure that it's in a language that they can understand so that they can make those risk decisions. Your job's to tee it up. Their job is to decide what risk to accept.
So, Tim, before you get started, I do want to pull the thread on that a little bit. And I have a little bit of experience in going to executives and saying, we're going to do a tabletop, and their eyes roll up in the back of their heads, and it's not a good thing. I would say that is the number one thing you need to press on. That is not no is not an answer for that, because that muscle memory has to be built across the company. And what I heard from someone very recently was, we'll just deal with it when it happens. That's how we do things. That's great, but at a holding company, we expect there to be a little more rigor around the process. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Tim, but
Well,
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I'm going to amplify that even further, because I would argue that what John and Patty were just talking about, it's all about the communications, right? The reason why the war games are so essential is because, CEOs of organizations are used to being in charge. But during a crisis is probably not the right time for them to be in charge, because they don't have the right set of skills to manage that situation, right? But if you've not wargamed that, if you've not worked on those communications, I would argue all of this is internal communications. And from my perspective, it's all about the communications, both internal, and then I would also argue external. If you look at the different breaches and what went well, how did they land? John called out in Mandiant's case, stock price went up. That's the exception, not the norm. Why is that? It all comes down to communications. I'll give you a specific example. 2 years ago today, RSA, my team and I were in a very different situation than me sitting here on stage. I was in the hot seat then, but it was for a different reason. So Mandiant's Intel team had published a blog post linking a group to the Lockbit crew, that the Lockbit crew took offense at that, even though it was actually true. And so I got a call 2 a.m. early Monday morning, RSA week, from my team that Lockbit had posted on their data disclosure site that they had hacked Mandiant, and that 3 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific time, which coincided with Kevin Mandia's keynote here at RSA, they were going to dump all of the data that they had stolen from us. Now, of course, they had not hacked us. But the situation in these scenarios is you're sometimes called upon to try and prove a negative, which is where not just, I would argue, wargaming comes in critically important, but especially your partnership with your comms team. Now, I was incredibly fortunate enough to have Melanie and her team who are fantastic at all things corporate comms. And in those cases, put yourself in that position, right? We know we've not been hacked because we've got no evidence of any Lockbit internally. but it could be a partner, it could be a reseller, could be some other sort of thing that's got data that they're going to leak that data. Trying to figure out if you've got that, is a bit of a fool's errand. So instead, what we did was we played out all of the contingencies. All right, they really did hack us. What's our comms look like for that? We prepped those statements, have those ready to go. No, they didn't hack us, which we were confident of, and this thing is all of ruse. All right, what does those comms look like? And that's all prepped and ready to go. So as soon as we know, right, because the key here and why the comms is so important for you as an organization is everybody's trying to assess whether you have things in control. That's the bottom line. Whether it's the regulators, it's your customers, it's your partner organizations, all of them are trying to make a judgment call. In our case, Mandiant, are we on top of it? Do we know what's going on? Or are we behind the eight ball? We're at the mercy of the adversaries. And so much of that perception is going to be based upon how quickly you can respond with accurate communications, which means you've got to play out all the eventualities because you don't know how it's going to play out early in the investigation when you're still data gathering.
So I talked to Tim a year ago, wasn't it? It feels like yesterday. We were hanging out in Beaver Creek together. But we had this conversation, and I'm a long-tenured CISO. I've been around for a few years anyway, not as long as Tim, of course. But I hadn't even thought about the disinformation component to it. So it put another wrinkle into my response plan that we have to be prepared to respond to disinformation about our companies and about our executives. So they are so being targeted right now with extortion, which is another area I think we have to keep front and center of an already complicated problem. So do any of the three of you have anything else you'd like to add to this before we move on?
Yeah, so definitely double down on all of the tabletopping. Think about our situation, right? We had a slow response. One of the reasons we had a slow response is because it didn't occur to me, of course, at the time, that if you were going to tabletop a hurricane hitting one side of your primary call center, we failed over to the secondary call center. Hurricane hit the other side 2 days later. You didn't hear about that, maybe, but that's what happened, and that's one of the reasons why it was a struggle for us to get the right kind of response time. Then when we went to do that, there were some Canadian consumers, and it turns out hiring 2,600 French-speaking call center reps is a little difficult on a single day, which wasn't something that we had done in the tabletop. And in their defense, had somebody done a tabletop like that, I would have probably fired them. I would say, my goodness, are we doing little green men out of outer space kind of deal here? I mean, what's the chance that a hurricane's going to hit one side of one coast and then go across the state, it's going to hit the other side 2 days later with a different hurricane? I would have definitely flipped out. In retrospect, that's exactly what you need to do. You need to go through those comms items. I can remember one time I was going into the Senate, I think. Somebody pinged me with a media request, and I had 5 minutes to respond. Okay, so there's your choice. You got to respond to that or you got to walk in. Well, you clearly got to walk in, so they ran the story anyway. On the Mandiant angle, another funny one was, a year later on the disinformation campaign, one of the major questions was, why did Equifax not pay its bill to Mandiant? And that was one of the reasons why we hadn't provided all the details. Never happened. Never even came up, never even occurred to anybody. I happened to have the Mandiant rep right next to me in the UK when I was asked that question, but that was like a lucky break. 9 times out of 10, you're not going to have the person who's the authority right there on stage that you can ask. And in a moment like that, getting back to those basics, you really have to have smooth communication plans, because I've got to pick up the phone and get the answer to that question, which never occurred to me before then.
Let me pipe in a little bit on the communications front. So some best practices to take away. One, when these incidents occur, you and your teams are going to be working 24/7. That's when people get punchy. You're using all types of real-time communications. They get preserved. They legally have to be preserved. So make sure part of your plan is to not just do once, but to keep doing refresher. It just takes a couple of minutes, but smart comms to remind everyone on the team, what seems funny now does not look funny 2 years from now when you're in a deposition or you're up on in Congress. That little reminder can save you and the company so much pain. And so it's just reminding people to stick to the facts on the comms. Secondly, privilege starts coming into as a factor. And so one of the things you can do pre-incident, and I still see this mistake made often because you think originally it's going to be a small incident, so you bring in the incident responder without privilege, and it turns into a big mess. And now you want to protect some of those early communications, which is when you're most uncertain. But you didn't bring them in originally through counsel. You can't protect those communications. So in your incident plan to bring them in through counsel, and then getting back to the comms front. Also, think about who is the third-party crisis communication firm that we would bring in a real incident. Let's meet them before the incident so they know our value, and may very much not be the same folks that you work on good news days when you're getting brand out. It's people that specialize in the crisis. And the third type of vendor to consider that often gets overlooked is, just like you would think about, okay, and what if there's a large if you have a public-facing site, for instance, would a large distributed denial of service attack? Who's a failover? What type of vendor? You need to think about the same thing for communications. And now there are a couple that specialize in the call centers, in being able to do mass notifications to business or other customers, if that fits with your business model. So think about, what's the real scenario look like? If the worst happened, I may not predict that I'm going to get a double hurricane that wipes out both my call centers, but I know I have this third-party vendor if we are overwhelmed for one reason or another.
Yeah, plus 100 on John's comment. If you're a CISO, general counsel should be your best friend, right? If you have any sort of incident that even if it looks small, the first call you should be making is to general counsel so you can get it under privilege, because worst case scenario, it turns out to be no big deal. You've wasted a phone call. It's not that big a deal. Whereas to John's point, if it goes the other direction and you haven't, then you've got a potential significant problem. I've got a humorous story around the wargaming as we're talking about this that I think is worth relating. To Russ's point, you should really try and make these real. And so I was at Target. We were rebuilding all of their systems after their little hiccup in 2013. And we were doing very extensive war games. Up to and including, Brian, their CEO, we'd bring the staff in. Well, it happened to be, we were doing a war game, and we had media look like commercials from television, et cetera.
Quick aside, because I helped with one of those. They're one of the only places that did surprise war games for the CEO.
Yeah.
So that they didn't know what the meeting was about. They walk in and then they get the scenario, which you won't be able to pull off every place, but it's a great learning exercise if you can do it.
I highly recommend it, because the cyber criminals, they just don't care about our daily schedules, right? They just have no consideration for our personal lives. So I think it's the only way to go. But in this particular case, we had called we had this war game, it was going. Chief Marketing Officer was starting new that day. We didn't know, of course, on the security team that we had hired a new chief marketing officer. He came in and got pulled into this. He went the entire day thinking it was real, and that on his first day there was another massive Target breach. So you do want to have some contextual awareness as you're doing some of these sorts of things, because it can end interesting.
All right, I'll add two to that. So one, when you do the tabletop, I always make sure to tell people that it's an exercise. Be careful about phoning a friend during the note. There was an incident when I was in government of a war game about a nuclear attack. This was out in Hawaii. Someone sent an email to someone out of the room asking for their help, who did not realize it was an exercise, ended up in the news, and then we had a real disinformation crisis communications issue. So communications tight. The other thing to emphasize on these is we have about the muscle memory is I still remember when I was in government, we war gamed for years, and I always use this as an example for CEOs who are reluctant to participate. It's something that we found so effective that the President of the United States, the cabinet, took time to do these war games and build the muscle memory. Understanding they're not the ones responding to the incident, but so much of it will be communication and understanding what the risks are. That said, we war gamed for years. What would it look like if a rogue nuclear-armed nation attacked the United States through cyber means? I don't know how many of you remember what that first attack was. We thought it would be electric or the water grid. But no, it was a movie about a bunch of pot-smoking journalists. It was the movie The Interview that offended North Korea and caused them to attack Sony Motion Pictures. Only time in my career I've had to brief the President of the United States and start with the plot synopsis of a movie in the Situation Room. And for those of you who have seen it, I blame North Korea for having to have had watched it over Christmas. It was surreal watching that with the director of the FBI. Not normally his preferred movie. But the movie doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense, so it's hard to summarize. But we got this, although we had the scenario wrong, we did have the muscle memory right of who would be meeting in the Situation Room to respond to a national security event so that we could have a coordinated United States response. And that same muscle memory applies in these instances.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good point to interject. I think I see a lot of folks get confused about the point of war games, and it's just that. It's muscle memory around, for the CEO, for the CFO, for the COO, for all of these different very important folks within your org. What is their role? When should they be just sitting there and taking it in? And when do we need them to make decisions, and what sorts, and that sort of thing? Because again, they're used to being in charge all of the time. And so we want to help them understand. And of course, part of that also is trust for you as a team, right? Because by you going through that exercise, they get to see you in a simulated crisis, which gives them the ability to trust you more, which allows them to lean on you more for successful outcomes.
And one lesson for everyone, which is what they don't understand, many, and there's good reasons for this, is they may think that you will be A, in charge, and B, know what the answers are. And what makes this so different from the other crises that they're used to responding to is one, the speed, but two, the uncertainty. So don't have the answers. Do an exercise that's realistic in that when they ask you, how long will it take to get back up? I don't know. How did this happen? I don't know. I'm not going to know for weeks, maybe months, maybe ever. So that they then practice, you have to make those critical business decisions in that area of uncertainty, and that this exercise really isn't about the CISO, it's about them playing role in the decisions they need to make.
So you can tell this is a very passionate group of people. The best thing about being a moderator is when you don't have to say anything. So you guys can come talk to me later. I'm a little sad I don't get to talk. But I do want you to take some of what you're hearing. But there was something that we've spoken about before, Russ, and that was, here you are in the heat of battle, and you've practiced all this stuff, and you've tabletoped the heck out of it. And then you look around, where'd everybody go? Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's an important point to think about. What do you do when all the people you thought that would be there to help you aren't there?
Right, so if you look at our situation, right, the CEO left, the CIO left, the CSO left, which is Chief Security Officer in that case, wasn't a CISO. Also had physical security in it, so it wasn't just cyber. In that circumstance, you would immediately turn to your business leaders. But at the same time, 3 of our business leaders were sort of locked in a SEC inquiry to wonder whether or not they sold stock before the time when the breach happened. Of course, they were exonerated. Message came out and said that it was fine. But during that period of time, 6 of our major leaders that you would have depended on for all of our wargaming, all of those leaders are gone. Again, another one of those situations that you probably wouldn't have considered. You're like, okay, well, we've got somebody in the management team that's left. But if you think it through, too, the people that are going to respond to it are likely in the organization anyway. So you need to make sure that you involve as many people as possible. Think about the seconds. Think about the people that you would rely on if the primary person went away. And I was also involved in some of that because, I mean, as you guys know, I'm a bit irreverent when I talk, and so my text messages weren't fantastic. I was joking in some of those cases, trying to keep it light, but you have to be careful where those are going to be used. And so we had to look at those communication channels and make sure that, yes, I've got the right people on the line. I'm talking to the right person. I'm not saying something to him that he has to relate to 5 different people. And on the market cap side of things, I think we lost like $6 billion over the course of those next couple of days. So we weren't as fortunate as Mandiant was to have their stock price go up. Now, if you think that through for a second, though, it's the Chinese military that came after us. That's who broke in. Those 6 leaders disappeared over the course of, let's say, the next 3 or 4 weeks. And then a whole host of other people were disappearing because of just the shock of the event, worry about it. We let some people go. There's a mix of so many things in your organization changes so much that you got to think through your resilience. And that's the part that comes out to me as we talk this through. When you're trying to do those war games, you may not be thinking about how is your organization going to be resilient, but take those examples that I just gave you. That's a real life example of the top of the leadership is out of commission during that period of time. How would you react? And whatever way you would react is how prepared you're going to be in the event that it happens.
I'm going to take that a step further. So what happens if your CSO or CISO is unavailable? So are you practicing to make sure that your second, third, and fourth tier down have the competency to pick up the reins if it happens? So there may be an instance where you have to take your SOC manager and have him run an incident. So having exposure of that SOC manager to the executives is keenly important. Where normally they're like, I don't want to talk to the CEO, don't take me with. It's really important that it's a team sport, folks, and unfortunately, sometimes the team captain is injured and not available. So you have to think through these scenarios.
What we were talking about too, you just reminded me, if you think through that situation of who you're going to want in a seat, I can almost guarantee you it's not who you think. The person that you think is going to be the one that you depend on is probably not the one it ends up being, because you can't put somebody in that real life scenario as easily as you think. And the people that you're sure are going to handle it great might handle it terribly. And the reverse is also true. The ones that you don't ever talk to, that don't seem to speak up that much, they may be the rock that everybody is looking to. We had that in our situation, in our war room where we were responding. Everybody would look to this one lady. Just like you could say, we're going to go do this. And then everybody's head would just naturally turn to her. And we're like, who is that? Right? So think that through from your organization. You've got the leaders that you may have identified, and then you've got the leaders you haven't classified. And you need to get hold of both.
And so that actually happened during 9/11. So I was working at the Treasury Department at the time. And I was assigned to the acting Secretary of Treasury to make sure he had comms wherever he landed. He happened to land in an okay place, Secret Service, the Intelligence Division floor, purely out of coincidence. He was not supposed to be there. He was supposed to be someplace else. Nevertheless, you have to deal with the cards you're handed. And where was our secretary? He was stuck in Japan on a business trip and unable to get back to the U.S. So you kind of have to take it as it comes. And you quickly realize that all those people who put their hand up and said, I want to be on the crisis management team, until it hits the fan, you'll find out who really wants to be there in a crisis. No matter how much you practice and how many scenarios you run, we never planned for 2 planes to hit buildings and have to evacuate a major city connected with only bridges. So plan it, test it. So I want to change direction just a little bit because we're all talking about what you do in the heat of battle. Now I want to switch the conversation a bit to talk about what happened afterward. And I have a little experience. I worked at Freddie Mac. You might have heard of that organization and how they're in government conservatorship. And what that meant is we have government auditors. We have every mortgage institution auditing us. We had We had auditors from everywhere. People had offices in our building that I questioned why they were there. Not that I had any business questioning it, but it was the post-effort, the post-breach issues that we had to deal with 10 years later. So let's have the conversation about the dynamic of what happens post-breach. And I'm gonna start down with Tim. So yeah, it happened a while ago. It might have happened recently, but there is continued ramifications that your company may not even be aware of. The breach is one thing. The matters that happen post-breach are almost as equally painful to do the remediation and come out of the other side of it.
Yeah. So I joined Target in 2014 after their big breach in 2013. So I spent 6.5 years rebuilding systems there, right? And to Patty's point, a lot of the aftermath is years long, right? You've got government entities, but I would say the biggest thing that you probably won't anticipate is just the sheer lack of trust. So what happens with a significant breach, if you've not handled the comms well, and or you've got a well-loved brand, where folks feel betrayed because, again, you didn't handle the comms as well, you've got essentially all of these organizations that you have to deal with, auditors, et cetera, who really aren't believing you. They're not saying that that's what's going on, right? But they're frankly not believing you. And so one of the things that, prior to dealing with a lot of these breaches that I didn't anticipate was how much work you're going to have to invest to regain that trust, regain that credibility for the organization in order to just be able to conduct business as normal, frankly, and not be tied down. So your audit load quadruples or more, et cetera. Some of the stuff, if you accept credit cards, I've always found it interesting that the PCI, if you have a breach, you immediately lose your PCI certification, even though you've met all of the qualifications. The breach invalidates it. So you've got to regain all of that, et cetera. That cleanup work, and a lot of it, though, I would say really goes back to Russ's comment earlier, because I couldn't agree more with it's all about the basics. I find we as an industry get things to 80%, and then we move on to the next cool thing. And that last 20% is what bites us, right? John gave an example. Oh, that system didn't have two-factor, even though two-factor is our policy, et cetera, right? And so it's actually a really good opportunity to reboot, to re-go through everything and go, you know what? All of these risk acceptances we've had, sorry, they're invalidated. We see really good reasons that you saying that that's okay and acceptable is no longer a valid reason.
Okay, we're going to have to do a quick wrap up here. We do want to leave time for Q&A. Are there any people that have questions? You guys are so odd you have none, or you have not enough coffee?
It is early.
It is early. All right, I'm going to just, I hate to cut everybody off here, but I think what's really important, and let me get past my disclaimer slide. There's the disclaimer. If you hadn't read that, there it is. Speed reading, it'll be there for later. And so we want to talk about what you're going to take away. So if I could start with John and just do one quick wrap up of what are the things we want you to take away from this conversation and apply when you get back to home. John?
All right, let's do a quick little list. So 1, tabletop. 2, the tabletop focuses, it's not tech. It focuses on business risk. 3, back to basics. So including inventory, knowing your assets, which is just always always an issue in these incidents. 4, comms. And 5, link to comms, and I think is the depth on your team, so that depth on your team and for the other people who'd be involved in the incident. So you have the key players, but then you have at least one layer further down. That also helps with anticipating the questions that you'll get. And then my final, all right, two more. One more is the lawyer privilege, thinking through comms in the light of how it's going to look post-incident. And then finally, friends. Thinking through who are the third parties, who are the other people in the community who can help you in your time of need.
Okay, so I would say if I were to frame the problem statement about inventory, patching, and the rest, I would say something along the lines of know what you want to patch, how often. That'll wrap in asset inventory. It'll also wrap in the ability for you to patch. The next thing I would say is inspect what you expect. I can't tell you the number of things that were just running that we thought were working, and then when you dig into it, it doesn't work like you think. The exercise that you go through to validate your assumptions and actually test and see, when you scan this asset, did it identify the vulnerability or not? Just stand up TerraGoat somewhere and point your scanner at it. See how much it misses. That activity is probably going to take you forward. If you're doing a maturity scale on 1 to 5 or something, it'll probably take you from 1 to 3 just by testing what you expect. And then on the people front, you've probably heard me say this before, pay attention to the healing power of bourbon and barbecue. Get people over to your house, find out what the spouses' names are, make sure that you understand that the people that you're going to rely on, the emotional capital you're going to use to get through this thing, they need you to put something in that bank. So take care of those people that are going to take care of you.
Yeah, plus 100 on that. Both Russ and John have covered the list. I would give you 2 specific to-dos. On the wargaming tabletop front, do it without your CISO. So go back, right? Especially if you are the CISO, it's a great opportunity for you to observe. You're on an airplane from Paris to Minneapolis. So you're out of comms for 10 hours. So for the first 10 hours of the incident, they got to go without you and just see how it ravels. So that's one to go do. Second one is go talk to your comms team and ask them what comms would they give in very specific situations. So, hey, we just had a breach. We don't have any details. What do you say? 2, we just found that we've had ransomware deployed all over the place and we've lost, I don't know, pick a hypothetical. We've lost 100,000 patient data. What do you say, comms team? Pick some very specific situations like that and ask them to give you specific results because it'll be super helpful for you starting to build a partnership with it.
We'll just throw on that one a very concrete. That can be appendices. You don't want a really long incident response plan, right? Because you want it easy to use. But you can do appendices. And so what I see now, you have no idea how long and how many people it takes to craft the statement that says we don't know anything. Every company does it a little bit differently, and it takes. So that is something you can pre-bake in an appendix, lots of brackets for what the fact, but what do we say when we don't know anything?
Wow. I hope this has been helpful for you. However, we have a few minutes left. I think if I look at my timekeeper down there, we probably have a little over 5 minutes maybe. Oh my goodness. Oh, 7 minutes. Okay, we went from more to less, single digits here. The microphones are right in the middle. Unfortunately, you must be right on top of it to ask a question because this session is being recorded, which is why I wanted to say that out loud. So if some of you are introverts and don't want to be on live TV later or on demand, you might want to tailor your questions. Anyway, the microphones are there. Do we have any questions in the audience, please? Thank goodness, and it's my good friend Dan.
Thanks, Patty. Recently, I went through a tabletop exercise, right? We brought in general counsel. Actually, internal general counsel was a good partner of mine, sponsor, right? But when we came to doing the actual tabletop exercise, a lot of the executives almost want to not make decisions. They didn't want to actually truly participate or pretend as my general counsel said, like, look, it's just playing like Dungeons and Dragons, right? But even though he was a good partner and sponsor of mine, right, like you sort of said, I was kind of supposed to be sitting behind, not actively participating. But it was hard for others to step up to be like, look, guys, this is an exercise. So do you guys have any recommendations or tips on how to actually get active participation and engagement to make sure that it is fruitful and useful?
So a couple on that, because that actually comes up often, and you're obviously ahead of the curve because you have a general counsel who knows about Dungeons & Dragons is, which means they probably have some idea of what IT is. Not always the case. So I think it is very valuable to have an outside moderator who can put them on the spot. And then I also, recommend if you have the outside moderator be a lawyer, then we ask, and even if it's not, ask questions like, if you're a public company, okay, what are you going to say to the disclosure committee for your SEC obligations? Who's going to handle that decision? How are you going to memorialize it? What are the factors? How does it compare to your 10K? The CISO can't answer those questions, so it means automatically that someone else in the company has to answer the question, and the CFO gets involved. What are the financial consequences? So change the questions to make sure that they're not technical, and make that true in this scenario. And then sometimes, if it's bad enough, disappear you. So the CISO is there, observing virtually or otherwise, but actually isn't participating, because in a lot of those, in a real incident, you're busy. And so they're going to be having conversations and reaction conversations without you.
So one last thing I would add, Dan, is change people's roles. So when person sits in another person's role, so your CEO is now the CFO, your CFO is now the CMO, make people change jobs, and they will become extremely critical of the other person's job and tell you what to do. It actually is a little bit fun, because they get to role play, and everybody loves to role play. I hope that helps.
That does.
Do you have another question?
Yeah, thanks for taking the time this morning. Good panel. I'd like to deep dive tabletops even a little bit further. So what do you see as best practice as far as how long that they should last for? And can you talk a little bit about what it means to actually escalate the scenarios? We're an industrial manufacturing company. So, our people are thinking about how do I, a plant comes offline, right? Or the contagion starts to spread. So can you just talk a little bit about some specifics about when you say escalate, what does that look like? Do you get more people involved? How do you think about that a little bit, please?
I'll do three.
I'm going to take the how long, because I'm going to tell you, you are going to get limited time with your executives. My suggestion is you don't spend any more than 2 to 3 hours in a tabletop. You can do it longer with the rest of the team, but your executives dial in, they may dial out. I mean, think about a real scenario. Try not to occupy their time, but make it relevant to what you need them to be participating in versus come for a whole half-day session or a full-day session. You're never going to get it done. And the other thing is, stop looking at calendars. No one's ever going to be available when you want them to be. Business trips are going to pop up. So what? You can't be there? Send a delegate, because guess what? That's real life.
Right.
Yeah.
Specifically to how to do the scenarios, a useful technique I have found is plan it from the adversary's perspective. So pick a specific adversary and what would be their initial target, and then think through how is the team likely going to respond, your internal team, and then how would a real-life adversary respond to those responses. And what that does is that gives you some branches in terms, and so then you can play it out iteratively, right? Where, all right, initial appearance is X, we've detected this situation going on, go, right? And then based upon the responses, if this were an actual adversary you were dealing with, how might they respond to the defenses in the play? And what I have found is that gives me a wide kind of map of paths to go, so that depending on how well the team is responding, maybe I want to ratchet up and make it meaner. Maybe I'm not getting the engagement, that was called out earlier, so I'm going to throw in some twists. Just approach that I have found.
And you don't have to do it all at once, right? You could do it over multiple days, right?
Yeah.
Do the small piece, see what happens, try a couple of days later, say it escalates, because that's what's going to happen in real life.
Yeah, for the CEO kind of rule of thumb, totally agree, 2 hours, not more than 2, and 4 injects, 3 to 4 injects, meaning, and I like to start with one that under your incident response plan wouldn't reach them, so that they realize what you're dealing with, it doesn't reach them, and then put it into the gray zone on the incident response. The last one should be full comms, communications, disaster, Congress sending letters.
Unfortunately, we do not have any more time. We are at the time period allocated to us. However, we will step outside and we will make ourselves available to you. You can connect with us on LinkedIn. Here's my note of caution. If you connect with us on LinkedIn, please reference that you heard us here, or we are not going to take your, hey, I randomly sent you a connection. Didn't you know me? I was in the audience. Because we can't really see a single one of you, and I'm blind as a bat. So there you go.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.